Hello everyone. If you're looking for the ultimate paranormal channel here on YouTube, check out my friend Josh Miota's Lost Through the Rabbit Hole. And if you want to hang out with him and his guests and his fan base, you can hang out with Josh and the rest of us at Lost Through the Rabbit Hole on Facebook. Check out the links in the description to find out more, and I'll see you on part 2.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Lost Through the Rabbit Hole. I'm your host, Josh Miota. Tonight's special guest is Nathan. Nathan has a wide variety of experiences, not so much on the positive side. With that being said, Nate, would you like to get into it and share what's been going on with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I've had a YouTube channel for quite a few years. I just started doing videos probably about a year ago. I think I started back in January. And my YouTube channel is Haujean Contactee. You can see that on the screen. What I am is I'm an abductee, a contactee, and a MILAB victim, which is a military abduction victim. And I don't mean that, G.I. Joe is abducting me or something like that. It's a joint ET military abduction program. And I have a name for it, which I got from James Rink from Super Soldier Talk, because he's the person that has actually done a lot more work into this field than I have and many others, and it's called Project Surrogate. So I guess the best place to start is to start with the abduction experience that I had. What I wanted to say is that a couple of things that we talked about before is that when you try to retrieve these memories, they're very, very difficult to retrieve. There's a perception that when you sit down, actually, when you watch TV, there's a perception in these shows that they put you under hypnosis and then it just comes right out. That's not how this works. This is very sophisticated mind control that's being used on us, and it takes a long time to get this information out, or to retrieve these memories. The other issue is that most people don't even realize they've been abducted, and that was my situation. I didn't realize that I had been abducted until around September of this year. So this is a completely new thing to me. Prior to that, I had ET contact since the early years of my childhood. It was one way, and then it evolved in my early 30s to be a constant two-way telepathic connection with various extraterrestrials. So let's get into this abduction thing. Now, as I said, most people don't realize that they've been abducted. In my situation, what I had throughout my childhood was night frights. A lot of people report this. For example, one particular night that I remember, and these are things that I have to do, either I have to pursue under hypnosis or some other means, because there's different types of it. There's more of like a standard hypnosis, and there's a waking version, which I'm not too familiar with. And so anyway, I would have night frights. And one particular one, it was just like the movie The Exorcist. I felt the presence come into the room, and then I pulled the covers over my head, and then my bed shook violently for several minutes. All I remember is being completely covered and soaked. I was soaking wet with sweat, and I was scared to death. And I remember, maybe staying under the covers for close to an hour before I felt safe enough to look around. That was likely a screen memory. Something happened. I had plenty of examples of this over the course of my life, and more come in every so often. I'll just remember something that I'd forgotten for many, many years. I'm 48. So we're talking about something that happened either before 8/6 or right after 8/6. So now what happened with this abduction, in my memory, they replaced it. Everything that took place was replaced with a screen memory. So I'm going to describe what the screen memory was, and then we'll go into exactly what happened to my recollection, because I only have fragments of this, and I wasn't able to get this information under hypnosis. I had spontaneous recall, and then other things actually started to come through under my hypnosis session. Sorry. And so what happened is I was 6 years old, and they're right at the end of my street. I still live in the same house. So right at the end of the street that I'm on, there's a park, and there's an area. It's on the left-hand side. That's a wooded trail. It's asphalt trail, goes to the woods. And then it's a bunch of fields on the right-hand side. It's a pretty good sized park. I don't know how big it is, maybe a mile square, maybe less. But anyway, so I'm riding my bike and I'm 6 years old. And the entire spring and summer, I've been riding further and further away from my house. I've been going, at first I wasn't supposed to leave the street. I was only supposed to go down a couple of houses so I could be seen. And then I kept pushing the envelope to eventually I got to go to the park. And then after that, it was just, I was forgotten about. Where's Nate? He's just riding his bike. So it was the fall of 1980. I'm riding my bike. And I go through the park and I've spent my half of my day there, and it's now getting close to sunset. It's I need to get home. I'm hungry. I can tell that I'm going to be in trouble if I don't leave now. So I took the long way back to the house. I rode through the asphalt trail through the woods. About halfway down this asphalt trail on like the left-hand side, there was an open area where there was a rope swing, and there was a fort off and on throughout the years. So it was a hangout place for older kids in the neighborhood. And even though I grew up with my uncles in the house, so I had older, kids around. They were actually, young adults. I still had issues with the older kids in the neighborhood because they didn't know me very well. So, I didn't go to the same school and so forth. So I was worried about being picked on. And so I'm riding down this trail and I could sense this fear. And one of the things that I've learned by listening to people who go through abductions is that one of the common things is that you'll sense something's going to happen. You'll sense a presence, and it's never a good one. It's not like okay, I'm going to be abducted. I'm happy and I feel joyous. It's something bad is coming. It's something really bad is coming. That something bad is going to get you. Something bad is going to happen. Is the way it feels. So I was relating it to the potential that there was kids at this area by the rope swing, and I was going to have some problems. So as I kind of came around the bend, I prepared myself and I started getting this fear. It was like in my stomach, and it was really intense. And it was like I was very anxious. I had high anxiety and I had a lot of fear that was starting to build, which was irrational and it wasn't normal. When I got around the curve and I looked, I could see that there was a group of teenagers standing around a fallen tree. And as I got close to them, they were probably about 20 feet away and they were off to my left. I didn't want to make eye contact with them because as soon as you do, you get picked on. It's like, hey, kid, what are you doing? I didn't want to have the interaction. So I said to myself, if that's the case, I'm just going to ride my bike straight through. I'm going to ignore them and act like I don't see them. Well, as soon as I saw this group, they were all dressed in navy blue and they all had these hoods on. They were dressed in the exact same clothing. And that was starting to really make me nervous. I was already anxious as it is, but now I have to look at these people because they're not looking normal. And the other thing I noticed too is when I looked, I could see that they had what looked like Halloween masks on. Some of them looked like luchador wrestling masks, but I could only see it from like the edge. I could see it from the side or just a little bit. And it wasn't until after all this came out that I started to remember things clearly, because what I was really seeing was ET faces. They were completely, well, they weren't actually a gray color. They were chalk white. That's the difference here. Their eyes were black and they were huge and they were tall. They're roughly, I guess, close to 6 feet tall. I don't remember them being overly tall, but I remember them being identical in height. And there were 7 of them. And they all had the exact same outfit on and they were the same build. There wasn't any difference at all between all of them. They were carbon copies of each other. It all looked very weird. And that's why I looked directly at them. And when I did, the one that was standing the closest to me turned to me and I saw half of its face, and it was a large almond-shaped eye. And this one had a mask on, like a ski mask or like a wrestling luchador mask, because there was a 1/2-inch wide piece of trim that went around the eye that accentuated it. Like a ski mask would have a little bit of like a little area of, fabric to to show the eyes and stuff. So I thought I was looking at somebody with a mask, but there wasn't any eye behind it. And at the time, that really didn't matter to me because I'm looking at something weird. And as soon as that person looked at me, or that thing looked at me, I turned my head and I wanted to get out of there. And as soon as I did that, I felt this energy hit me in the back of the head, and it felt viscous. If you ever seen the images of like hauntings or like videos of like spectral activity where it looks like it's like liquid light. Have you ever seen that, Josh?
Yes.
Okay. Well, the way that moved is the way this felt. Now, I didn't see anything, but I felt it hit me in the back of the head. It went straight down my spine. And as it hit me, I got hit in the stomach with like fear. It was this jolt of fear. And everybody knows what that feels like. It's like you're completely in your own zone and nothing, you're not thinking of anything. And somebody jumps out and scares the crap out of you. If you amplify that about 10 times, that's about what I felt, because it was more to it. It was energy, not just emotion. And from what I remember, I just kept pedaling as fast as I could until I got out of the park and I got about halfway up my street. And then I stopped to rest and get my breath. And then I kept going and I went home and I didn't talk about it. Later in years, I had asked, the kids in the neighborhood, was there ever like a club where everybody dressed up like a blue ninja and wore navy blue hoodies and navy blue pants and the same pair of shoes? And nobody could tell me. And everybody's like, no, that's absurd. They had no idea. And I talked to people that had spent most of their lives during their, their early years at that swing, hanging out and, having a beer and other things. So there wasn't anything there, to go with. But it wasn't until years later that I found out that, in fact, that was a joint military ET abduction, and it involved the Greys as well as the reptilians, which is the negative side of the equation. It's mostly an Orion faction. That's you hear Alpha Draconis a lot. That's because people don't really know. They're not thinking clearly. They're not looking at the big picture, because ETs can change their body like we change our clothes. So if you can look at a reptilian, they could be another race. You could be looking at a human ET that's really a reptilian. It's whoever they're aligned with. It's more or less a grouping of souls versus a particular species, because once you can do that, you can be anything that you want. And if it's a psychic experience, you can shapeshift in any way you want as well. So that's where the stuff started with me. Now, what really happened was, I'm jumping ahead. There's really no way to explain this unless I'm writing a book, and it would make sense. But to jump ahead to tell you what I really experienced is that when I came around that bend and I started to see this group, I had this memory fragment where, and I think this is afterward, so I'll save that to after. But what happened was, when I got hit in the head with that energy, I came to a complete stop. And I just remember putting my arms beside myself, just standing erect and straight. And then I floated off the bicycle. I floated away, and so did the bike itself. And I remember, like, as I was floating upward, I became like weightless. And I remember all of my cares just melting away. I felt like I was wrapped up in like the warmest sleeping bag or the warmest comforter you can imagine. I was warm and cozy, and I felt wonderful. And all I saw was this light blue light. Instead of looking up at the trees, because I was going up, everything turned to a light blue color, and I completely lost consciousness. The next piece of memory that I have is that I must have been floating in reverse order back to where I was supposed to be, back where they took me, because I initially assumed that if I had been abducted, that they walked over and surrounded me, and then we all went up together. That didn't happen that way. They never even touched me. And what I remember when I came back, and the fragment has to be of me coming back, because it doesn't make sense in the order of events here. But I saw a group of Greys. They still had their hoods on. It was the same group. And I say Greys, but they're like a gray. It's a type of a gray hybrid, but it's got white skin, just like chalk. They were standing in a circle with their arms outstretched, like a Stonehenge configuration. They had their arms like kind of like this on top of one another, and they're in a circle, and there was a light above them. And I guess they were getting ready to be lifted up into the ship. They were finished, and they were dropping me off. The interesting thing with this is there's no time expired. There was no missing time. And it was just like they just came in. They create like a little distortion with how our reality flows. And they just plucked me out for a period of time, and then put me back in and inserted me back in the timeline at the point that I left. So there was no missing time. And I'm sure that if there was say like a camera attached to a tree, which they didn't have back then, but if there was a camera someplace or a witness, they wouldn't have seen anything. They may have seen me just riding my bike straight through. I don't know. But the ETs have an ability to manipulate time and take you without any missing time taking place. The reason that they give you missing time experiences is so that you will talk about them. It gives you an evidence, some form of evidence to pursue what happened to you. That's not just my opinion. That's something that they told me. Because, like I said, I had 15 years of constant contact where I was constantly connected to an extraterrestrial. Not a Draco. This was a Haujean ET. This was somebody that I recognized to be a family member who was actually helping me and was able to gain access to me under some kind of a treaty or some type of an arrangement. So it gets very complicated as to how these things work, but later on I'll have an opportunity where I can get into a little bit further. But so anyway, yeah, they actually take you and give you missing time for the sole purpose that it's to motivate you to find out what happened. And the only people you generally hear who've had missing time, for the most part, are people that have went public and are allowed to speak. So it's not indicative of every abduction is what I'm saying. It's only there as a marker for the person to find it. Just same thing with scars. They can take a sample of your skin and they can and they actually can heal you. They can even cut your finger off and reattach it, or you can cut your finger off and throw it away and they can reattach it later by actually making a finger to put back on you. You won't have any scars. They can completely, if people that have scoop marks and other marks that are left on them after an abduction, it's all done intentionally unless they're sloppy. And normally that's not the case. It's all about social engineering, and it's not a positive thing either. If you really want to know why ETs are doing something, I always tell people one particular thing. There's one excellent strategy for that is don't look at what they're doing. Don't look at the methodology. Look at the outcome. How does it affect society? What effect did it have on you? So by giving people missing time and scars and other experiences, such as with Angela, for example, Angela Stat, she's able to remember much of what she's experienced. And they haven't been replacing it all with screen memories like they did with me. That's because they want you to talk. And I explained that to her because she would ask, like, why are they doing this to me? And it's because it's now obvious. They want you to talk. They didn't want me to talk. It's been a whole different situation with me. In fact, I've tried to reach out for 14 years to researchers, and anybody who would just entertain my story. And I couldn't get any traction at all until, oh God, I think it was like the winter of last year. Actually, yeah, the winter to the beginning of this year. Before I got anybody who was willing to talk to me. And I'd sent extensive emails. Some of these in some cases, when I contacted Rex Bear, I wrote him a book. And what I found out was, and if you remember that email that I sent you, I got to the point where I was disgusted. I'm like, okay, I'm going to start reaching out to people again. And I know I'm not going to get a response. So maybe I'll do videos about it and talk about it. And I wasn't trying to lure you into us, like a kind of like a trick. Cause I said, if you don't want to talk to me, it could be interference. And I said, nothing's going to happen to you. You're just going to have a strong aversion to talking to me. And I didn't do that on purpose. I did it on purpose, but I didn't do it to try to get you to want to talk to me. I just figured, I'm going to try this because everything else has failed. I don't know what to say to people, because I do know that they've interfered with my interactions with people, and this is what they do. And I know this because back in, I think it was 2007 or 2008, I was considering contacting Project Camelot when they were still together. And I got a hold of my friend and I went over his house and I said, okay, well, if I'm going to tell this to strangers and go on social media and talk about it and expose myself like this, I'm at least going to try it with a friend and see how he takes it. So we went out and had some Chinese food, and I came back to his house. I was still talking about it. And they literally made him pass out in his chair. He was staring right at me, and he just went out like a light switch. And I had been told not to contact anybody. And I had to get up mid-sentence and wake him up. And he said, I said, are you okay? And he's like, yeah. He says, it was weird. He says, 1 minute or 1 second, I'm listening to you. And the other, I'm in a dark place and I can't hear you anymore. And then he told me that like the next day, because I called him the next day and I actually apologized to him before I left the house. I said, they did this to you. I said, I apologize. I said, if I would have known they were going to do this to you, I wouldn't have said anything to you, because I don't want you to I don't want you to go through what I've been through. And he looked at me like, he didn't know what to say. It was just a look like there was some doubt, and there was some, believability, and there was some shock, and he'd rather forget about it. It was the impression I got. So when I called him the next day, his attitude was, he was making excuses for it. Well, maybe I was tired, maybe this. And he said, but there was one thing that was a little weird. I said, what's that? He said, immediately after I got up out of the chair, I felt completely exhausted. I mean, like dead tired. And he said, as soon as you walked out my door and I shut it behind you, I felt instantly better. And I said, and I've been through that myself. That's them. They can do that to you. I said, they can remotely do that to you. And that was to send me a strong message to keep my mouth shut. And it wasn't because they didn't care. They didn't care that if I talked. It had nothing to do with that. What they were trying to do is, they knew, because they use time referencing technology, they can look into the future. And when they looked into the future, apparently with me, they saw that I would eventually try to go public, and then that would lead me to waking up and realizing who they were and what they were doing. And that was a detriment to their program, because they had kidnapped or essentially hijacked me actually not this lifetime, but I was first abducted in a previous lifetime. I was born in 1947, and all this has come out since I had hypnosis. It wasn't in a hypnosis session, but it came out later, because a lot of the information I get comes out of my subconscious, and I'll just spontaneously know, or I'll happen to remember. I'll see images and I'll have fragmented memories, or I'll simply know it, or words or phrases will come out and I'll have to look them up or contact somebody. Like, for example, nest keeper was one of the words that came out. I had no idea what the hell that was. And I'm thinking, nest keeper, what is that? I contacted James Rink. I sent him a text, and he got right back with me, because it was right after I got up in the morning. I was still in bed. And he said, that's an assassin term. He says, that's a code word. So, that was another thing that led, so now I was using an assassin program. There's another thing, another keyword that came out, Project Sigma. Go ahead.
So these MILAB programs are also, they're doubling as sleeper agent programs.
Absolutely. There's sex trafficking, human trafficking, massive child abuse, mind control. This is MK Ultra. They always say on steroids. Well, this is far beyond that. This is because they want you to know about MK Ultra, and they want you to know that they stopped doing it. Well, they didn't do that. When they tell you something, when the government says we stopped, and we did it because we found out that it had sinister implications, that just simply means it worked exactly the way they wanted it to, and they thought they could go further with it, and they needed to release it to the public to get it out of their system. So if there's any evidence that comes up later, people just say, well, you were just kind of heard about that and you think it happened to you. It's part of the psychological warfare that they're involved with us. Yeah, it's all of those things. Max Spears is a good example of that. That was Project Monarch. That involves human trafficking, satanic rituals or sexual abuse, murder, and all sorts of other things, as well as assassinations. A lot of the stage shooting, well, I'm not going to say stage shootings, but some of the shootings that are out there, not the copycats and not the really legitimate sick people. Some of these are actually programmed sleeper cells. They could do it to assassinate a president, and they have. There's a lot to this. There's far more to it than you could possibly imagine. The whole ET cesspool is very deep. We talk about draining the swamp. Well, this is the cosmic swamp, and it's going to take a long time to drain it. So anyway, that was the initial abduction that I had in this lifetime. There's been others that I haven't been able to recover, because I don't have the time or the money or resources to try, because it costs anywhere from $175 to $300 to do a hypnosis session, and it could cost tens of thousands of dollars unless you're lucky and you spend about $1,000 or $2,000 and you start getting things. Sometimes things just come to you and you remember, but the people that you hear that have these extensive SSP stories are people that have went through years of hypnosis and years of other things to try to get these memories. So they didn't just remember yesterday. For me, that was the case. I started to recall this stuff beginning in August when literally the shit hit the fan in my life, because, I became aware of this, and then a lot of things took place after that, which we can get to. So, the other thing I wanted to mention too, before we get into the rest of it, is that for about 20 years, I had a series of repetitive dreams about a military base. I also had dreams where where I could move objects with my mind. I could fly. I had lots of, what you would call lucid dreams like that. Now, a lot of people that are psychic or have abductions, a lot of them will say the same thing. Yeah, I've had a lot of lucid dreams. I've had telekinetic dreams, flying dreams, and all. It kind of goes with the package. But mine were the main ones that I would keep having this constant dream of this military base. There were no windows. It was underground. It had that sense to it. It was connected to a cavern, because sometimes I would have a dream where I would be in a cavern, and I'd walk down the end of a passage, and I'd see a brand new shiny metal door, with like a yellow paint, or just like the kind of paint you find in like a courthouse stairwell, or like you find like a jail cell. It's that epoxy paint. It just comes in generic colors. It'd be like a door like that, and then a really high tech security camera aimed right at me or right at the door. And then I would go in the door, and the interesting thing is with these dreams, and what I learned about it was that this wasn't like an accident that I had these dreams. They were implanted. They were fragments of memories that were intentionally implanted in me, because the ETs play mind games. And in my case, if they could control my awakening, then they could prevent me from really waking up. So my entire life was just a series of events that led me to believe that I was different for some reason, but I didn't know why. And like I said, in the beginning, I thought they were spiritual beings. I had no idea they were extraterrestrials until 2000, around 2005 is when things really started to change. And I didn't perceive them as angels or other types of beings. I just knew that the angel label didn't fit, but there was more to it. And I was constantly looking and doing research, trying to find out what this was. And I thought that I just remembered heaven for a long period of time. I thought they were pre-birth memories. And for a long period of time, nobody talked about pre-birth memories on social media. It wasn't until the last 7 or 8 years that I actually started to see people talking about it. And I thought I was special. It's like, okay, I have this memory. I can, I guess I'm not supposed to remember it. Well, what happened is that now I was having these memories of this underground base. And I was always in the memory. I was always looking to find ETs. I'd walk around. And I think I was a child in these memories. Maybe a teenager. The context isn't there to identify my age, but I did feel young though. I don't know if it was because I was dreaming and I was a kid when I had this one particular dream or not. I really can't say for sure, but it feels like I'm a young adolescent and I'm wandering around this military base. And what was weird is that I obviously belonged, but I felt that I wasn't supposed to be there. I always had that feeling, but nobody said anything to me. In fact, nobody even made eye contact. It was like I was a phantom just walking around. And there was times when I would climb up in the ceiling. There's at the end of this one particular hallway, some of these hallways are massive. I mean, you could put 2 trucks stacked on one another, 2 semis, and put them 2 side by side and stacked on top of each other. So, 2 trucks wide,
Huge.
2 high, and you could fit all that in a huge hallway like this. And the only hallways I've ever seen are the hallways on Capitol Hill. Some of the Senate buildings have big hallways, and but in this case, there were big hallways, but all the doors were normal size, at least from what I could remember. That may have been edited, I don't know. But in the one particular case, there was one hallway that kind of got really low. It was maybe an 8 and 10 foot ceiling, and I was able to jump up and grab. They have that framework you see in like shopping malls and restaurants. It's just below it's above the ceiling, but it's like steel frames.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about. That was there. And I actually remember jumping up and like sitting in there and like hiding from people. It was just like I had the run of the place, but nobody cared that I was there, but I couldn't leave. And I kept having these dreams over and over again. So I guess we're going to jump forward and actually get into the hypnosis session. And then I'm going to
I,
at least
I want to
go
ask a
ahead.
couple of questions for how did you know you were underground?
Because there's a context that even if it's an implanted memory, they can take the context out and you're like, what is this? Doesn't make sense. In this case, there was a context to it. So I knew bits and pieces as to why I was there, and I knew it was military, and I felt underground. It just had that sense to it. And in one particular memory, or actual, dream, I walked past this. It was a big hallway, it's like probably one of the biggest ones there. And on the left-hand side, there was this big military insignia. I don't remember what it looked like. I just remember it being really big, and it was all over the wall. And there was people walking around with military uniforms on. I mean, they had, it's just like when I went to Capitol Hill for activist work, there'd be a lot of people there from the military industrial complex and high up military people that would have uniforms on with medals and stripes and everything. That's what I saw. And I remember walking past this room, and I looked in, and it was a lab, and I could tell there was a screen on the wall, and there was somebody standing there looking at it. And then there was a long counter to the right-hand side, like a lab, like you'd see in a high school lab, or, like a college lab. And but the room had this weird look to it because it looked like it was liquid air inside the room. It was like there was some type of an energetic field that was sealing off the doorway. I don't know if it was to keep the atmosphere inside so that it didn't mix with the rest of the hallway, the air in the hallway, or maybe they needed a different atmosphere in there, and this was a way to keep that, but allow you to walk in and out without having to go through a door or a containment chamber and go from one, from one to another, or what, I don't know, but it just looked like it was liquid air, and that's all I know about it. But it was just weird shit like that, and so that was the extent of that. But it was things that just built up that led me to believe there was something else going on with me. Now, it wasn't until years later, after all of these experiences and things that have happened to me, that I sought some help, and I contacted James Rink from Super Soldier Talk, and he was really nice about it. He took some time out of his schedule to do a free hypnosis session with me because I sent him the Rex Bear video. For those of you who haven't seen that, you can go to my channel. I contacted Rex Bear in 2019, and Rex read my email on his podcast, but it wasn't clear. I think what he did is he read the email and he did a second video about what happened at the same time. And I think it was the night before, and that was the next morning. I think that was probably your impression.
Yeah, he from what I recall of it, he had nightmares about being in an auditorium.
What this really was is I was contacting him to tell him that there was an Enki cult that was using Satanism as psychological camouflage. It's called the Joy of Satan. I said it's a MILAB, and at the time I didn't understand. I didn't think I was a MILAB, even though I brought it up. I said some of my experiences are similar to MILABs. I never thought that I was a MILAB. But what I found out later is, of course, this particular group, which is still available, it's still around today, and it's still courting teenagers and adults. That this is actually being run by Draco and Haujean ETs and reptilians, and it's a joint military program, and it's being run on social media. It's a social experiment. It's designed to take MILABs that have been put through these programs and court them in using subconscious psychic programming and networking, and then bring them in and put them through a theological experience based in the Enki Sumerian mythos, which isn't really a mythos. It's looked at historically as a mythos, and then it has some satanic themes going on in there. But it's really what it really is just it's a kind of a mind control type of program and a social experiment. It's a way of derailing people and sidetracking them from waking up, because if you're going to get yourself involved in that, then you're not going to be waking up and realizing that you were abducted by the U.S. military and extraterrestrials in a joint program, and horrible things are done to you. And that's that. You'll think that you're, because I mean, they have an inversion of the New Age. It's really an inversion of the New Age movement. Instead of love and light, it's about darkness, but then it's not really. It's, because Enki is considered to be the creator of humanity in this cult. And it's the whole Zachariah Sitchin sort of thing where, he read the clay tablets and translated it, but they turned it into a composite religion, combining that, Aleister Crowley stuff and a bunch of other things, Eastern religions and Gnostic Christianity. It has some themes in there as well. So it's a composite religion created by ETs and managed by ETs where the contact is real, but the truth behind the contact is false. There's no truth there. It's a social experiment. And when you join it, you become a guinea pig and you're subject to whatever the hell they want to do to you. It's a dangerous place to be because it's driven some people to suicide, some people to murder. And it destroyed my life, and it would have happened anyway because they were going to do something else. It wasn't for that. But I call these virtual temple complexes because it's taking the ancient temples and then turning it virtual. So instead of you going to build a pyramid, you're going to go be part of this internet cult. And you're going to do these rituals and you're going to have these experiences. And in my case, it was the same ETs that are interfering with me in the very beginning were the ones involved in these rituals and interacting with people. You would think the ancient aliens folks would want to hear that the ETs, in fact, I mean, if you think about it, I could validate the entire ancient alien hypothesis. The only problem is that the U.S. military is involved in it, and it's a joint program involving horrific abductions and horrible things that are going on. I'm not saying the Joy of Satan is involved in horrible things. I'm saying it's an offshoot of these major programs that are being run in a clandestine way where the U.S. military and our government, United States government, as well as other governments in the transatlantic system, as well as the Russian side, because there's two halves here. The major players on the world stage have cut deals with various factions of ETs, most of which are negative because they control the program right now. They're in control of this planet and they are setting the agenda. And unfortunately, the majority, 90% of the contact that people get is from negative extraterrestrials, like the picture of the one that you've got right behind your head. Quite a sinister looking individual. So anyway, I was explaining how I was in this MILAB program. Well, what happened to me after this is that after the abduction, I was 6 years old and I just kept having these experiences. The one that really stood out that kind of got me into this Joy of Satan thing was that I was at my house. And my wife came in. She weren't married at the time, but we were about a year away from, maybe a year or two from getting married. She came in from work and it was like the beginning of the month or the end of the month, whatever, one of the two. And she wanted to do all of her bills. So she laid her bills out and had a futon. She laid all these bills out on it and was just going through it. She had a phone there just in case she had to call anybody. And I'm sitting there with her and I stood up and immediately I had this vision and it was an emergency room hallway. And I saw everything, it was just like a hospital bed. It was an emergency, like a small emergency room. And, or at least just a section of one, like the end of a hallway. And I could see a hospital bed and some stuff. And I instantly got this telepathic message that there was this woman. I called her the drill sergeant. She turned out to be, in the end, what she turned out to be was a Draco reptilian who was appearing as a Haujean female. Haujeans are extraterrestrials. They're 7'9". The male and female are completely uniform height. They look like they're Polynesian or Indian, and they have vertical slit eyes. So anyway, she had said to me, she said, very, very loud and very, very direct. She said, Laverne is in the hospital and she cut her finger, or she hurt her finger, something like that. And Laverne was my grandmother who raised me because my mother had a lot of problems. And if you know anything about Project Surrogate, which if you don't, I'll educate you. One of the key things that they do to you is they implant your soul into a female inside a uterus, usually in a dysfunctional household. This is what, James Rink told me. And when I thought about it, I looked back at all of the other contactees that were in the Joy of Satan that I had interaction with and other people that I've met. Those of us who had abusive ET contact always had a broken childhood. It was always the same type of pattern. And that's one of the earmarks of Project Surrogate, which I'll get into in a little bit here. So anyway, getting back to where I was, Where was I, by the way? Need a little help from remember.
Well, I had a question too.
Sure, go ahead.
With that
I'll figure it out.
how many contactees do you think you met through that group?
Okay. I was in a spiritual warfare group of about roughly 12 people. I don't know if every one of those people were MILABs, because you got a lot of people that come in or aren't connected to this that have experiences because they're associating themselves with these entities, and then they leave and you never hear from them again. So you don't know what their story was. Out of that group, I would say probably, let's see, there was Leslie. Leslie was definitely in my lab. She had what I went through, which was past life emotional memory recall torture, where she felt suicidal all the time. That's another earmark of this one. They did the same thing to me. So there was Leslie, Sherry, Rendy. There's three. There's Tor. I think Tor was probably one of us too. He had some of the similar things were happening to him, but it wasn't that bad. There was another guy from New Zealand, which is 5. I know it's hard to say. And there was also Joey. There was Tim. He was the healer out of the group. A lot of times when they put you through these type of scenarios where it's a group contact scenario, oftentimes there'll be a healer within your midst, somebody that can help you with the psychic attacks. That was another pattern that I saw that was present in the Joy of Satan. And I've seen it with other, contactees. Elizabeth April, for example, has a friend in, I think the UK, her name's Sharma. Sharma handles the energy attachments or the psychic attachments for her. So a lot of these people will have somebody that act like the healer. Well, the healer was Tim. So I would say 7 or 8, maybe 9 people. And some of those are iffy, but the ones that were directly connected to me, I know that Rendy, for example, was a family member from my past existence, from my Haujean existence. I had incredible emotional memories about him. When I say emotional memories, I mean all the emotions are there. You recognize who the person is to you. You have incredible love for them and emotions for them. Out of nowhere, it just comes out of nowhere, and you know where it's coming from. It's coming from a past that you can't remember. So I had, and then I've had other people. So I've had two people come through that were really family members. Others I was being told that was the case. So I don't know. To answer your question, it was the majority of the people that I associated with. The problem is that at that point in time, none of us knew that we were MILABs. None of us had any memories of being abducted. We all had experiences, weird experiences, where we would have these spiritual experiences and we'd see an entity that would look 3-dimensional or solid that would come and actually, make an appearance. Those are generally screen memories. We all had those particular traits, but nobody was talking about MILABs. I didn't even know what a MILAB was at that time. I had vaguely heard about it. And I think the first time I really got exposed to it was in 2007 or 8 when I started watching Project Camelot. So that was it. So yeah, I would say the majority of the people that I talked to, but who knows? I mean, I had 24,000 at one point, which was the membership a couple of years after I left. Who knows what the percentage is? I say the majority of people were probably just regular people stumbling into that group, fooling around with it and then just, leaving their account active.
A couple things about that group too. So they're still active, right?
Right.
Is there any celebrities attached to that?
None that I could ever see. There was nobody. And the interesting thing with that is I don't want to get it too off topic to answer your question, but when I talked to James Rink, we had an interesting conversation that the NSA was messing with, because the whole time I was on the phone, he gave me an hour of his time from 12 to 1 a.m. And he literally had to go outside of his house to talk to me because the NSA was affecting the volume of the phone call. He could hear me, but I could barely hear him. And the volume would go up and down and up and down. And it would cut out during certain keywords that he was getting ready to tell me something. It's like, and by the way, it was, like, what did you say? So that was what happened with that. So there's always interference. But what he said is there's a lot of people that are celebrities that are involved in these programs and in the Surrogate program. Celebrities, political leaders, and that it goes back much further than Eisenhower, which actually it does, but it wasn't called Project Surrogate. It's actually part of a much, much larger planetary social engineering program that has been in effect for 1.7 million years. Actually, I'm sorry, 1.9 million. If you go back and you look at carbon dating to the earliest human signs of civilization, like just spearheads and campfires, it carbon dates back between 1.6 and 2.4 million years. I was told during contact, during telepathic discussions that I had, that it in fact goes back 1.9 million years. Prior to that, there were other forms of humans, and we see that in fossil records. You have the little tiny one, like the hobbit, hobbit people. You have people look more like apish and so forth. There's just been one version after another. And then it just kind of evolved to 1.9 million years ago. They started a fledgling race project known as humanity. And from that point, they've had us immersed in what I call a planetary consciousness simulation, which is an augmented reality that relies on technology to suppress our overall consciousness. We're naturally psychic. Animals are psychic, and I'm sure you're aware of that as a paranormal investigator.
Yes.
You see evidence of that. And if you get really close to your animals, you'll be able to tell that. But we can literally walk out in the middle of just walk out in front of our house and get hit by a meteorite, or you hit by a bus or a falling airplane, and we're not wise at all to it. It just happens. Sometimes people get a premonition or a sense, but usually it's difficult to trust that because it doesn't happen often. It's usually somebody else is in control of it. That's what it seems. That's what it seems like. That was the case with me. So, so anyway, we're all supposed to be naturally psychic, but we're under a planetary consciousness simulation. And what this allows the ETs to do, it allows them to create a guided history where they literally write our history for us, but they put their own people in here to play roles and to socially engineer the population. The pharaohs, for example, in Egypt were almost always something to do with ETs. And even in the religion, they talk about it. They say that, the pharaohs were, from the gods. They were descended from the gods because they were. This has been the case in the ancient world for a very, very long time. We have a staged history, and it's more like the Lord of the Rings than what the academics or the quackademics would have you believe, because they're controlled by the Jason Society, which came out in the Watergate documents. Actually, wait a minute. No, it didn't. Jason Society was first uncovered in the Pentagon Papers. And that exposed how the Vietnam War was actually a war that was done for political purposes and not to win it. So it was it was classified documents read on the floor, I think, of the Senate. And there's a loophole where if you get classified documents, you can read them on the floor of the Senate and you don't get prosecuted. Don't know exactly how that works, but it was a senator from Alaska did that. I seen him, and actually I had a chance to talk to him, but I didn't. He was at the National Press Club, and I used to do volunteer work for an organization called LaRouche PAC, which I no longer associate with. But anyway, that's where the Jason Society came from, and that's their name comes from the story Jason and the Argonauts. But really, what it is, it's a secret working group of scientists. They're appointed. It's an invitation-only group. It's very, very secret. It probably has a different name now because now that was exposed years ago, decades ago. But what it is they're the ones that when, leaders of the world have questions, these are the top people they go to. It's possible that some of the celebrity physicists and people, that are experts could very well be in that secret society or secret actual, working group of scientists. And they're the ones that ultimately, they don't have total control, but they're there to advise what the public policy should be on extraterrestrials. So they're the ones that will say, yeah, we don't want this out in the public, but really who's really controlling things are the ETs themselves, because what the scientific working group would do, they would be there to write reports and to tell you, okay, if we talk about this, we're going to lose the monopoly on fossil fuel, or not fossil. It's actually made out of carbon. The earth produces carbon. It's another scam. But, they're there to make sure that the apple cart's not upset, and they control academia is what it is. So when the funding gets cut, or if the agenda is not to talk about ETs, it's the Jason Society or whatever similar or whatever manifestation they have now. It's something I haven't actually talked about. It's rare that you hear anybody talk about that anymore. It's something that's been swept under the rug of history. But there's a real organization called the Jason Society, or it was, and now it's got a different name. But that's why they all act in lockstep. The entire transatlantic system is under the control of this particular group, and they set the agenda for academia. That's just why Neil deGrasse Tyson would never talk about ETs in a serious way until the government said, okay, it's okay to talk about it now. Then Michio Kaku started going on Ancient Aliens, and the whole BS Hollywood machine gets going and propagandizes to us. You see how that works?
Yeah. Oh man, I remember back in the day, he was outright weird, or like nasty to people that would ask him questions about UFOs and aliens.
Which one, Neil?
Yes.
Yeah, he gets kind of arrogant about it. It's like an elitist thing. He's, and if you ever seen him go on Joe Rogan, that was a great interview.
Yeah.
Because Joe literally destroys his arguments. It's like, why would they care about us? He's like, why would they care about us? I mean, here's a comedian and a podcaster. This is a scientist and a celebrity because he's a scientist. So it's, and I think he's the host of Nova, or actually was.
Yeah.
And he's giving this ridiculous argument. Why would they care about us? We're just insignificant. They use that ant analogy that we really care about what the ants are doing or whatever. It's just, we're like a bug to them. No, we're not. We're extremely important to them. Nothing could be further from the truth. We're at the heart of an alien proxy war that's been going on for a very long time. And the concepts of it have been seeded into our religious belief systems. And you can look at the evidence of this. If you really study it all, you can see it. You'll know what you're looking at. But if you go to the Farsight Institute and you look up The War in Heaven and watch that documentary, you'll see how an ancient cosmic war that destroyed a planet in this solar system, creating the asteroid belt, which left scars on the surface of Mars, and actually covered half of the moon and it was half of the moon, half of Mars are covered in large craters on one side, and there's a stain on the moon Iapetus, which is Saturn's moon. That was all from a cosmic war, and that concept was seeded into the religions as the war in heaven that we find in the Bible. So everything is tied to the religious texts, very, very closely. That's why it's important to research those as well as to research the ET phenomenon, because they're one and the same. They portray themselves as the angels, and they also portray themselves as the devil, as the demons. It's one big alien stagecraft sort of presentation. And we've got a front row seat, and we're chained into the seats, and we can't get up. It's more or less an analogy you could use to describe the human condition right now.
Back when you were with that group, do you still stay in contact with any of them since you left? Did any of them leave the group with you?
Yeah, actually, wasn't too many people left the group. I left the group officially after 7 months because I figured out that, because here's what was going on. In the New Age community, you get attacked by reptilians usually, or negative ETs. And you'll hear influencers on social media talk about reptilian attacks and what to do and so on and so forth. Well, in the Joy of Satan, since these reptilian attacks are generally staged with the contactees that are doing the social influencing, the same thing was happening in the Joy of Satan. So we had a theology where it was the inverse of the New Age movement, to where we were the dark side, but the dark side was the light. And that's what they told us. So, I don't want to get into the whole theology. I can do that at another time. But it was an inversion of the New Age movement. So we were getting attacked by angels. There was angel attacks along with, and some of them were actually ETs. They show up as, like a gray or a reptilian sometimes. But generally it was angels. It was an angel theme. So we're being attacked by the angels, and we're with the demons. And instead of telling us that we were star seeds, they told us that we were demon incarnates. Now, this wasn't something that was on the website, but it was something that we were being told individually as we broke off from the main group and created our subgroups. In this case, it was a spiritual warfare group. So getting back to your initial question, I kind of got sidetracked. You asked me, how many people have I stayed in contact with? Total of the people that I've stayed in contact with has been actually 3 people. I got a friend on the West Coast who used to live in Virginia. I won't share his name, but he's a MILAB contactee. He still gets contact to this day. Me and him go back and forth as to whether it's bad or good. He's still heavily controlled and isn't seeing everything. He would say that, I'm mistaken, I'm wrong. And then I have another person, her name's Sherry. She lives in Maryland here with me, about 80 miles south of me. She was a pen pal and a support system for many, many years. This is how we got through the abuse. We were having mutual contact by the same ETs. In fact, in one case, it was the same two individuals. We're actually having contact with both of us. And then there was Rendy, which is the third person. That one was a bit different because I recognized him to be a past life spouse. So did he. That resulted in when things took place and they had manipulated the friendship to the point where it became strained and he had to break away because he was becoming suicidal. Because when you start to, there's a way, let's just say, for example, you meet somebody and you recognize that they're a past life loved one. Doesn't matter if it could be anybody, just someone you cared about, especially bad when it's a spouse. And they bring you together and say there's ETs behind this. If they bring you together in the wrong way, it'll result in post-traumatic stress disorder to the max, and you'll become suicidal and that's what they were doing. They weren't doing this to bring me together with somebody and make it a glorious reunion and to be happy and wonderful. This was done to be destructive. It was done to be destructive in his life, with his personal life and mine. And I had pretty severe post-traumatic stress disorder for over 5 years after that. So, and he attempted suicide. He went into the military. He's a good bit younger than me. At the time, he was 18 and I was 31. And I had been sent here first. He apparently was in the same boat as me and is a MILAB and we're just starting to talk again. I just heard from him recently, a few weeks ago. We're sending each other, like a text or two, and I'm trying to let him know, hey, this is what I found out about me, and I need you to take a look at it, because he has tried to distance himself from it. And that's the main thing that people do. I would have had more contacts afterward from that group, but most people, when the contact becomes abusive, the first thing that they try to do is to separate themselves from anybody who's associated with it. Kind of like in Alcoholics Anonymous, they'll tell you not to hang around anybody that drinks. And so this was a way of people saying, okay, I'm going to get away from the group, and I'm going to get away from everybody I had associated with that group. And and hopefully that's going to stop this contact. And maybe it worked for some people. I don't know, because I lost contact with them. But the ones that maintained contact, the ET contact never ended. Sometimes it fizzles out, because the goal here isn't to continuously have contact with you. It makes no sense from a manpower standpoint or from a logistical standpoint. The goal here was to take people that were a threat to waking up, that had a specific purpose to carry out. And I'm not talking about, in this case, it wasn't, okay, I'm going to run for president. I'm going to start a movement to get rid of corruption in the government. I'm going to cure cancer. I'm going to do this or that. Really, this has to do with psychic warfare, sometimes either throughout your lifetime or after death. And when I give you an example, a friend of mine, and I've talked to other people like this too, they'll have these experiences where they'll go to sleep and they sense that they're a part of their soul or higher self leaves their body and goes and does something. Sometimes they have fragmented memories of this. Often it's soul rescues or helping other people who need help because they've had a traumatic ending to their life and they're trapped. And then this part of their consciousness goes out and helps those people move on. Angela Stats had talked about something like that she had experienced too. So it's a common thing with certain people that are having these experiences. So
I actually dealt with that in my last episode a little bit. She dealt with a energy translator. She dives deep into the Akashic records.
What I was talking about is that not sure how I began this discussion. We have to rewind it, but what I was talking about is that there's people that are being sent here in these engineered lifetimes. And I know I've kind of missed a piece here, But I wanted to inject the term engineered lifetime. So it's probably the first time that anybody's heard that term, and it's self-explanatory as to what it is. But the context of it is going to be different than what you think. It's not, you got engineers kind of plotting your life out. What it is, it's extraterrestrials. In the case of MILABs with Project Surrogate, there's definitely life engineers because they put you in a life, and Project Surrogate essentially means surrogate mother. So I'm going to get into that in a moment, but I want to get back to what we were talking about, these soul rescues. And I don't know if we're jumping around too much. I may as well just jump. I may as well just jump back into this and put both feet in the cold water here, and really get into the heart of the matter before we run out of time and don't touch upon it. I've talked about being a MILAB and so on and so forth, and I've talked about the joy of Satan, and we got into that a little bit. And that was a MILAB-based program being run by the military and some negative extraterrestrials. It's a satanic cult, but it's really an Enki cult with the use of Satanism and psychological camouflage. So they were just recapping it. What I want to talk about is these soul rescues and what's really going on this planet. Okay. The whole purpose of Project Surrogate is to kidnap and abduct and clone and create soul fragments of psychic children. So have you heard about anything like this, Josh, or is this a new territory for you, other than what I've said in emails?
I've heard about the whole cloning program. I mean,
okay,
it's a little bit new to me about the psychic children, but it's not surprising. It honestly kind of reminds me of a little bit of what was happening in Stranger Things.
Right. And anytime you see shows like that, it's basically taken from people who, like myself, who give testimony. Just to give you a quick example before I get back into it, when I started talking to James Rink, and I started to notice, well, here's the thing. I was having these keywords come out of my subconscious. There was Project Sigma. He told me about Project Alpha and Project Surrogate, because when I described what had happened to me and what these memories were, he says, that's Project Surrogate. It was clear and obvious what it was. Project Alpha is a hybridization and creation of super soldiers, augmented fighting machines. Then you have Project Sigma. Project Sigma publicly talks about, basically communicating between the military and extraterrestrials. And then there's Project Sign. That was the ones that I was involved in. Project Sign handles crash retrievals. Now in Project Sigma, which apparently is also connected to these secret space programs and super soldier programs, from what I understand about myself, and I don't have the cognitive recollection of this yet, I've got the knowing of it, and I've got information coming out of my subconscious that is leading me down this rabbit hole, pun intended. And so essentially, I know that I'm in these programs because they came literally from my own inner voice. And I do have an unusual state of consciousness because after I went through all this whole thing, which I'm going to explain about, this whole MILAB program, what I found out is that I came into this world as a psychic child, essentially. And it wasn't in this lifetime. I came into this world in 1947. And I was a male in that lifetime. I only lived about age 27, and I was actually killed off by the government as part of the Project Surrogate program. And what they do is that Project Surrogate, and I mentioned earlier, it actually goes back before Eisenhower. So we're not going to get to that part. We'll just leave that on the shelf for a moment. From Eisenhower forward, what happened is that the U.S. military and other militaries, other governments wanted technology from these ETs. And the only ones that would give them the technology without the strings attached that they didn't like were the negative ones. This is how they take over a program. I've called this a fledgling race project, which is what it is. But when you have all these competing factions of ETs and you have them interacting with the government in a clandestine way, they can cut deals. And by cutting those deals, they can take the majority control over a program. And they did that a long time ago to maintain control for about a million years now. These are the negative side. This is the Orion Draco factions. It's mostly centered in Orion. There's a bit of discrepancy about Alpha Draconis. But like I've said earlier, ETs can change their bodies like we change our clothes. So you really don't know who you're dealing with. You just have to look at them as another soul, because they can be anything that they want to be. And so what they're doing is that there's a an ancient war that has been going on for a very long time. I call it an alien proxy war. And what it is that there's two general factions of ETs. There's multiple factions, in fact, and multiple agendas, but two main agendas, which is one, to take the human race from the fledgling race project phase and take them to where they become a full-fledged race and a member of a galactic grouping of other worlds. So that was the initial vision for humanity. The second one is to kill off humanity using artificial austerity, wars, as well as other types of medical programs that are running right now that we can't talk about, using the World Economic Forum and the elites to depopulate and reduce the population to as close as zero as possible, at which point the human beings will be replaced with a reptilian-based race. Now, it could be reptilian, it could be a human-reptilian hybrid, or a gray human hybrid, because we have all these different programs going on. I was told that some of these programs are for creating another planet like this where they would stage engineered lifetimes. Now, that's something I haven't brought up. I mentioned what that is, but I didn't really discuss it. So an engineered lifetime is when a member of an alien civilization is put into a human lifetime as a human being with their mind wiped. This is the reason why none of us can remember our past lives. Humanity has been hijacked, just like I was hijacked in a sense. Humanity's been hijacked and used as a staging ground for engineered lifetimes for extraterrestrial citizens. And it's done for healing and personality re-engineering purposes. So if you got a personality disorder, it doesn't respond to conventional therapy, then they put you in an engineered lifetime. So you go into, because most of these races live in perpetual adulthood. They don't have the renewal process of childhood. Over time, that has an effect. Those who do that and practice and live that way have a greater level of mental illness over a longer period of time versus ones that actually have a family type of environment where they recycle their family roles. So the children become the parents and parents become the children. And then a group of souls will maintain a family, say like a family, or what you would consider to be a genetic line, which is what a family is anyway. So you have a need for this. So what they've done is there was various things that took place. There was an ancient cosmic war that's been seeded into our religions called the war on heaven. After that, there was agreements made to where the reptilian side, or the Orion, reptilian side, everybody would come together and start utilizing this planet for a period of time. So they began staging these engineered lifetimes. Eventually, the Draco faction decided they were going to take over the human program and phase it out, at which point it became an uncontrollable proxy war. So you've got all these different groups, and there's 9 general races that genetically engineer humanity, and a bunch of other assisting races. And humanity is a mixture of over 20 different extraterrestrial, genetic lines. I would give you an exact count on that, but I don't remember. And there's other people talking about this. It's around 20 something. And it really doesn't matter that much. We're not genetic royalty like they lead us to believe, like some contactees have said, because we're genetic royalty in respect to being a combination of so many different races. So we're a petri dish. Whenever they need genetic material, they can just pop in and take it. As far as genetic royalty is concerned, we have 3,000 to 4,000 chronic genetic defects that are in the human genome, which was left in on purpose. That's not how you treat royalty. That's not a perfect creation. So we're not really genetic royalty. We're just exploitable petri dish of genetics that they're using. And eventually, with some help, and once this all ends, humanity will be able to genetically engineer its own problems out of itself and have a more pure, flawless genetic structure. That's part of the overall plan for the positive side. But the ET proxy war is being fought in human bodies. Like World War II, I would say every one of the major wars at some level or another has been manipulated and is part of this proxy war. So what is happening with Project Surrogate is that souls are coming in here that have been involved in an effort, not just in this world, but in other worlds, to liberate these types of situations, to take races that are being hijacked by negative extraterrestrial groups who are involved in soul slavery. And this goes back to religions. You know how when you say you sell your soul to the devil owns your soul? This is all based in fact. It has to do with ETs claiming ownership over people's souls, because there's a soul slavery type of ring or operation that's going on that involves this planet. People are being abducted at a national forest. They're being put into off-planet programs. They're being put into android bodies. They're being cloned and fragmented. They're creating altars, and they're using people off planet in other solar systems and other galaxies. However, as far as this goes, I know it goes from here to Andromeda, because I had an Andromedan contact who was working for the Dracos that lied to me, and he was part of it. And that's how far that it goes. It may go further than that. There's a lot of different groups. And this particular individual, if you're curious about what he looked like, he had no ears. He looked like a regular person, Caucasian looking, human features, about 6 feet tall. No hair, no ears, but everything else looked normal. And he had a very, very fair complexion. His name was Heelbead. Nice guy, but, in fact, now that I know what he was really about, what he was doing, you'd have to be either the most weakest person I've ever met or a scumbag, one or the other, or a little bit of both, because I can't see how anybody could associate with this type of program. So what Project Surrogate is when these souls come in, because there's an effort to liberate humanity, and it has to be fought in the proxy war itself. If the positive ETs decided that they want to take over this planet and save humanity from what's going on and stop this push for depopulation and enslavement with world government, it would be an active war with the Dracos. It's mutual. What do they call that? Mutual assured destruction. That's the term that I was told. And so they have to do it within the proxy war. So what they do is they incarnate people, and they keep sending souls in here that are like psychic mercenaries. A lot of them. Others are here for healing purposes. Others are here to be agents of change, to be presidents and leaders, social, to lead social movements and so on and so forth. And there's an entire system of social, manipulation that is taking place behind the scenes. And the ETs are the puppet masters of our world. So Project Surrogate, the purpose of that is to take these incoming souls that pose a threat. These are the ones that, in my case, I came here with a kind of a split consciousness, meaning that I have an active, conscious, higher self that I can communicate with. It's like a second person inside you. It's not like a split personality. It's just a second inner voice, and I can get information. And it also gives me controlled psychic abilities that, if I have to defend myself, I can do it. But I can't utilize these abilities. I can't make money from it. I can't go out and say I can read minds, I can read cards, I can do this or that. It's not for that purpose. It's simply, for the moment, it's to guide me through this and to help me defend myself because of what's happened to me. I was kidnapped about 7 years into my life, which began in 1947. So around 1954, 1953, 54, somewhere in there. I was abducted the first time. This is a past life, which I have no recollection of, but I got this directly from my higher self, because all of this framework of my real truth, or my real history, had to be laid out to me without providing the memories and the emotional impact. Because, when I did a hypnosis regression, I absolutely, like I told you before we went on air, I said, I had 2 months of pretty bad depression. It's very destructive to dig into this stuff. And that's what a lot of people don't understand. It has a real impact on you, and there is nobody to help you after you recover these memories. You can't go to a psychiatrist and say I was abducted by aliens. And it's not going to work. They're not going to blame it on what it is. They're going to blame it on mental illness. Even though you've got a perfectly normal life and you maintain yourself and you sound lucid and cognizant and just intelligent and reasonable, yeah, this one thing makes you crazy and we're not going to accept it. So you need some pills and you need more therapy. You're not going to address the problems. You can't go to those people. People that we did have in the past, which are very few and far between, were influenced by the CIA. So, and in that case, you get your regressions, but you got no therapy afterward because it's about intel gathering. So anyway, I was kidnapped because I was sent here. I was identified as a threat by these Draco ETs. I was a psychic child. I was abducted, and they took a clone of me and then put that clone from that. Once they got a hold of the clone, they could control my consciousness and then clone that clone and fragment the soul of that clone and create alternates. And then these alternates were used in these SSP programs and so on, and super soldiers, assassins, whatever it happens to be. I was used. I know there's a total, besides from now, if I look at it from my higher self perspective, there's 9 alternates. I'm one of them. The first one that came in from in 1947 was 2, and then there were 7 others. 2 are female, 5 male is what I understand it to be. And so that's the situation there. And so what they're doing is, like I said, there's a proxy war, but the Dracos have cut deals with the military to abduct U.S. citizens and citizens of other countries. And these citizens are coming here to fight a proxy war. And they're being shut down because once they abduct you and they create that cloned alter, they then bypass your higher self. So if you come here with an active higher self, which is a threat to them, they can control that higher self, break the connection with it, and then you're at their mercy, and then they portray your higher self, and which is what they do. And so from then, from that point forward, it's mind control, the purpose of which is to keep you from waking up. The optimum outcome is for you to never realize that you were ever abducted or had anything to do with ETs at all. That's the purpose of it. So, and that's what I found myself in. Now, how all this came about is that back at the beginning of this year, and for a while before that, actually, may as well just go back to 2019. And this is what happened then. I have been made very, very sick. I had autonomic nervous system failure because they can make you sick, and they did make me sick throughout my entire life using a cloned alternate. This cloned alternate was taken when I was 6 years of age. That's when they abducted me at the park down the street from my house. It's a copy of this body, not the previous. And they use that body to mind control and make me sick. So I've had 7 sinus surgeries, 7 spine surgeries. I've got 5 levels of my spine fused. I've got chronic nerve damage. And then, of course, they also gave me a speech impairment as well, which I had since I was a little boy. And that was also to kind of derail and just negatively affect my life. Because what they do is they sabotage your life. If you don't have any money, you don't have your health, and you're just on a steady state of decline, they're going to be able to keep you under control. And that's all it is. What I was essentially a prisoner of war by the Dracos and the U.S. military. And and to say this, it sounds like I'm crazy, but there's people out there saying similar things, and some that are over the top, well over the top of this. So I guess I'm in good company, but that's what happened to me. And the reason they call it Project Surrogate is because they create an alternate, essentially, and they put you in that. So they put you in the womb of a mother. So let's get into my soul transference memory to really to help this whole thing to make sense. So when I
had one quick question too. When you refer to that too, it's pretty much the same thing that a lot of people call soul trapping.
Right, it's what it is.
When it comes to, okay.
So, so what they did was actually what happened to me. I'm trying to get back to the beginning here. Okay, I'm just going to get back to 2019. That's where I was. So I had the autonomic nervous system failures at the end of my life. They were making me sick. So I had all these different problems. I had the speech impairment and everything. And then, I couldn't work. And I was at that point where, it was just, what's going to happen with my life, So I started getting really sick. It started to gradually, kind of like, mount. I was just getting gradually sicker, and I wasn't aware of what it was. they were affecting my hormones. They had shut down my testosterone production. I wasn't aware of that. I had a very, very low level testosterone, which affects your cognitive abilities, your energy, your motivation, everything. And when you're sick from other things and you've got spinal pain, it's one thing overlapping the other, and it's difficult to even sort it all out. So you think there's something else that's causing it, but it's this. Keep in mind, I'm also under heavy, heavy mind control and abuse psychically from ETs at this time. So I started getting sick, and I was pretty much, I felt like I was going to die, and I was actually relieved. That's how bad they had actually made it. And so this went on for a period of time, and it started in the April of 2019. It lasted because I had to go through a long process of trying to get doctors and neurologists to get me to a testing center, which takes 10 to 11 months to be tested, University of Maryland. I went through incredible amounts of difficulty with being turned down. Doctors would literally walk out of the room when I told them what my symptoms were and what I thought it was, and they just said, "I can't help you," and they wouldn't even be helpful. I had to go to Johns Hopkins and speak to one of their administrators. Then I talked to their head of neurology, and they set me up with the testing. So there's obviously, I do believe there was some interference there at a subconscious level, much like when I try to contact researchers and podcasters, because they were making my life enormously difficult, to the point where it was getting to be absurd, because people were acting in ways that they shouldn't act, totally out of the context of what they're doing for their career. So I finally got all that set up, and then about 6 months before I actually got to get the testing done, somewhere in there, 3 to 6 months. I think it was 3 months, 3 or 4 months. I had this experience, and what happened was that I was sitting home one night, and I was watching a Rex Bear, leak project video, and I had already tried to contact him 2 other times, and I decided, I'm going to die. I'm sick. I'm going to try one more time. I don't want to do an interview with him. I don't want my face associated with this. I don't want to go and talk, because I had a speech impairment at the time. And I just didn't want to do it. I was sick. I felt really bad, and I looked bad. I didn't want to be on camera. So what I wanted to get the story out, and I figured I would contact as many people as I could. And I tried to do it for 14 years, and I got nowhere. Finally, I contacted Rex Bear, the Leak Project. The third time, he raised the email on his podcast, and then has an implanted dreamscape where they induced fear into him. And he goes into this dreamscape and he talks about it. It's on my channel. It's on his as well, but you'd have to dig back into end of September of 2019 to find it on his channel. So they put this implanted dreamscape into him where he went literally to Satan University, because I was talking about a satanic cult. So he finds himself in this university setting with all these young people, and everybody's happy and they're all healthy and everybody looks like they're doing well. And then he gets a tour, and he goes in this auditorium, and they're all chanting Satan, 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 like a chant. And this energy's building up. And he's like, I got to get out of here. And he left, and he woke up. But he had this incredibly lucid dream experience. And then he goes and he waits a couple days or a week. He has Elizabeth April comes on the program. And about an hour into the show, he says, I got a question for you. He talks about my email. And she did a psychic probe to find out what it was. Now, Elizabeth, sad to say this, but Elizabeth's dealing with the same astral garbage and ET garbage that I was dealing with. She's a MILAB victim. And how I know that is because a friend of mine had a psychic vision, a download that showed her and other people, including myself, including Rex Bear, being victims of this program, this surrogate program. And not only that, but if you're abducted by ETs, if you have any ET contact, you are a MILAB. There's not one damn thing that takes place in this country or in this world that the government isn't involved with, unless it's something in an offensive means by the positive ET side, and they're not directly involved. But the majority of abductees and contactees are on a list. The U.S. military and other militaries and other governments know exactly who they are. And they know exactly what's going on with them, because there's compartmentalized factions that are working with the ETs involving these abductions and mind control experiments. They're in on it. They're in on the abduction of psychic children, which is what I was. And I was put into this program and hijacked from there, because what's happening is that the positive ET side in the proxy war is sending souls in here to act like psychic mercenaries and healers and to fight the proxy war. So we fight the war using human bodies, essentially. This is an ongoing theme within the MILAB community and super soldiers. It's, I never took any of it seriously. I never thought that I was associated with it. I thought that I was just a star seed. I thought that I was just someone who was having ET contact, and that there was, the problem is that, I can't even say this and for it to make sense. I was heavily abused, but I thought I was having positive contact. That's because I was mind controlled. So what happened was I started to do these videos and I tried to get my story out because nobody'd listen, and I started getting attacked and I started getting sicker. What they did back in 2019 is they told me, you're going to work for us and you're going to go out and make some videos, and we're going to make you into a social media personality for us, and we're going to make you better. I knew that they made me sick, but it wasn't, the gears weren't going right because I wasn't putting 2 and 2 together and coming out with 4. I was coming out with something else. It wasn't making sense. And at the time, I had a had a wonderful woman came into my life. We're not together anyway, but she's just a friend on social media, and we talk all the time. Turns out she was involved with me in a past life, a past ET existence. We both recognized that, and she actually came here to help me break free from this, because I had more, because like I said, I had help from multiple people. There was 3 individuals that came into my life around this time that helped me. She was the main one, and there was 3 extraterrestrials that were already helping me, and they were able to communicate with me through treaties with these other ETs. So as a POW, in a sense, they were able to talk to me, but they had to do it under the control of an AI system. So if they said something that was incorrect or wrong that I shouldn't be told, they'd cut the communication off, and I wouldn't be able to talk to them for a period of time. They'd be punished for it, or they'd be forced to lie to me. And then they would try to tell me what was going on. So that was going on. And then I had other people helping me. So anyway, I started doing these videos and I started getting attacked, and things kept getting worse. Now I'd already been made better, and now I'm being made sick again. They started attacking my left ankle. I could barely walk from it. I started having heart failure symptoms. I had to stop doing videos for a while after I did a couple of interviews in a Typical Skeptic podcast, and did some interviews, all of which I was under heavy influence of the ETs and constant. They were constantly doing things to me in a cognitive way to either make me stutter, absent-minded, and affect my interviews as well as my videos. And they were keeping people away from me as well. So anyway, I got to the point where the attacks were getting severe, and I could barely walk. If I wasn't already unable to work at that point from being sick, I definitely wouldn't have been able to do much at all with that ankle being the way it was. It literally stayed swollen the entire time. I mean, the swelling didn't go away for about 6 months. And so I had my friend, and I said, look, can you please take a look at this? Because she did some psychic healing on me before. And so immediately she took a look at it, and what she saw was, she didn't see the normal energy body like she'd normally see. What she saw was something that other people have reported on, and I've heard this kind of scantily here or there. What she saw was me. She saw a copy of me, a clone alternate of me, laying on a metal table inside a big room with Dracos and military personnel and people in lab outfits, and that they were injecting my ankle. They had I'm sure you know what a ring stand is, right? It's for for lab equipment. It's like a frame and it holds test tubes and things.
Yes, yeah.
They had basically like a ring stand, but it was modified to handle an automatic syringe that was connected to a hose, and they had multiple ones, and they were actually injecting stuff into my ankle. And this was being done at the White Sands military base, which is it's a missile test range, but underneath that test range is a massive deep underground military base that handles the majority of these clones and the super soldier stuff. It's kind of like one of the hubs for it, the main hubs for it. It's where they actually keep people. It's where they house the alternates of the MILAB victims that they're controlling and torturing. So they can remotely damage and hurt the clone and inflict pain, as well as influence your mind using that clone, because there's a silver cord connected to you. It's a life force cord, and there's also many other cords that are connected to a transdimensional AI computer system that is connected to the network that actually suppresses our consciousness in the planetary consciousness simulation. So, and the military, these military programs through these treaties have access to this. They're working hand in hand with these negative ETs. So she saw this, and she tried to do a healing on it, and it wasn't very successful. Then she got a series of downloads after she told me this. And she's like, "You've been hijacked. She goes, I know this sounds crazy, but there's another version of you out there. There's a copy of you out there. It's in this military base." And then she started to have these floods of downloads, one after another. I don't know, 6, 7, or 8 of them. And she just started sending me all of these voicemail messages on the cell phone. Now she lives in Australia, so I think it was coming through it was Signal, or yeah, she sent them through Signal. So she's telling me, and I'm listening to all these downloads, and I started to cry, because I mean, it's like my whole life is just evaporating. Everything that I believe to be true about myself is now being just stripped away at a rapid rate. I mean, every single voicemail, a couple minutes at a time, it's like, boom, that's gone, boom, that's gone. And she starts laying out this entire program. And it not only does it involve me, but it involves every social media influencer out there for the new age, and anyone who talks about extraterrestrials. It's a massive military abduction program that hijacked people coming in here, agents of change that have this specific soul energy frequency. And somehow or another, she didn't get it. She wasn't part of this, because she came here at a different capacity. And this capacity would be to do soul comfort or soul healing and soul rescue type work, but not in a direct militaristic way. Apparently she was able to get through the system, because there's a lot of people like this that have these abilities but aren't being harassed like this. And so I was one of the ones who were sent here to actually do damage to the system. And what they were doing is that there's a large number of us coming in. There's a big influx of souls. These are people that the military refers to as having angelic crystalline DNA. And what that means is, and I'm not talking about, I could go get a genetic test and everything. Sir, you don't have 2 strands of carbon-based DNA. You've got 12 strands of crystalline DNA that's not carbon-based. That's not going to happen. My body is no different than anybody else's. Crystalline DNA refers to the energy body, not the physical body. DNA upgrades would happen mainly to your soul or energy body, not your physical body. DNA, the carbon-based DNA of your body, does have a certain degree to do with psychic abilities, because animals are naturally psychic. So should people. The difference is that predators are more psychic than their prey, because they have a greater capacity they have a much greater intellectual capacity, a higher intelligence. They're able to perceive and interpret information at a higher level than the animals that they hunt for food. And the reason is because if it was an equal playing field, the food chain would be disrupted. So there's an order here. There's a design in the way psychic abilities are given out to different species. And humanity should be very psychic, and yet it's not. That's because of ET influence and just what they're doing. And so anyway, getting back to what I was saying is that they're sending us here to make a change, to create a paradigm shift, to liberate humanity from what it's being put through, because it can't save itself. We're to the point in our government where, and not just this government, but all of them, we're not going to be able to turn things back around. It's gotten too far. They're too sophisticated. They've got help from off planet. There's too much stacked against us for just people to vote bad people out of office. It's not going to happen. You're not going to succeed by overthrowing the government. You're not going to do anything with just reconstitute the same misery that you just had from the previous government that you overthrew. So, and violence is rarely the answer, but it always happens that wind up that way. And that's always because of these negative ET influences. Humanity is just one cyclic. If you look at civilization and the history of it, it's just a cycle of tyranny, a cycle of rising up and then collapsing under itself, and then just constant
over and over and over.
And it's
like the snake eating itself.
Right. and we can't govern ourselves because we're not telepathic. If we were, we could view what the government's doing, we could police the government, and unless they could create a simulation that alters our consciousness, an augmented reality that it really affects us at a psychic level, then if they can't do that, they can't then they can't control the population. The population controls the government. So now that the ETs have taken away our psychic abilities and reduced us to below that of an animal, now we're at the total mercy of the ETs as well as the elites. So at that point, you can control a population. If you want to get a population of people to commit suicides, you can get rid of them and change the program and put your version of what you think should be living on that planet in there. This is how you do it. You infiltrate, you shut down their ability to perceive what's going on, and then you infiltrate and you take over the governments, the institutions, and you engineer a death of a civilization. That's what they're doing. So you have this influx of souls coming in that are here to stop this. And the military, according to James Rink and other people that have recovered more memories than I have, is that they literally refer to the incoming threats to the establishment as angelic. When I delved into myself and I asked that question to my higher self, what I was told is that essentially what this really is that we go by that label, but in reality, we're just ET people. We're just people that have volunteered to take part in this proxy war because we feel that it's our moral obligation and the right thing to do to fulfill the will of the source consciousness and there's many names for God, but essentially we're basically instituting the will of God is what we're doing. And so that's why they're hijacking these souls. That's why they're putting them in the program. So what happens is once they hijack you, once they take that clone fragment and then they start fracturing it and making more clones, they can create the ultimate warrior. Because if they can get someone who's as psychic as anyone could ever possibly be, I don't care how advanced you are, and then as an extraterrestrial, so as an individual or a civilization or a species, you're the people they're going after at the very top of the food chain because they carry out the creator's will. They have what's called the crystalline angelic DNA of the energy body or soul. These are the targets that they're going after. If they can control them, then they can wage the proxy war within the confines of itself, because they can't, like I said, go outside too much and attack the enemy. They have to do it in human bodies. Ultimately, humanity saves itself, but it happens through the influx of people like myself. And I never thought that I'd ever say this, but I mean, this fits with everything that I've experienced. And I was never really religious because one of the things that they do to many of us when they have control is they break us away from religion and God in any way they possibly can, even though they created most, if not all of these religions, and they influenced them to make them more negative than they should have been. But and there are mechanisms of control as well, but they didn't want me connected to that. They didn't want me connected to anything spiritual except what they were going to provide me, which was these staged experiences, which kept me asleep, which kept me believing in whatever they wanted me to believe in. So I didn't put 2 and 2 together and make 4 and realize, hey, there's something going on with me, and pursue that and eventually break free. So what happened is after she had these downloads, okay, I rushed and I made a video and I put her voicemails on a video, and I upset my friend. So our friendship almost came to an end, but I did it because, and I immediately took it down on her request, but I did it so that I could reach out to researchers, because I needed more than just my own testimony to explain things, because I had been getting a brick wall up to that point. Nobody would talk to me. James Rink came into the picture from Super Soldier Talk about a week or so after that, and I shared the video with him. He immediately said, hey, he goes, I normally charge $200 or $250 for a hypnosis session, but I'll do it for you for free if you help me with research. And I was like, great, I'll help you with whatever you need me to do. So, so anyway, to make that story shorter, we got together about a week later and on a Zoom chat, and he did a hypnotic regression on me. And, what happened is people think that it's, you just go under hypnotic regression and you can pull these memories out and everything's good. It's like the TV would indicate, if you're watching a paranormal show, or somebody going under hypnosis, and then all this stuff comes out. What they don't tell you is that may have been their 100th episode or their 100th session. It could have been years after they first had one. What you're seeing is the culmination of a lot of work and a lot of effort to get this out, because these are heavily programmed people. They use the most state-of-the-art mind control you could possibly imagine, and they don't want you to remember it. And sometimes you remember false screen memories as well. So there's always interference going on. So I did the hypnosis session with them, and here I'm thinking, I'm just a star seed, but now I got this weird thing going on, and I'm thinking, okay, and there's a soul transference memory, which I haven't really got into. What happened is that in this memory, and this is the earliest memory that I've had since childhood. I can't really place when I recalled it. It's just that it was always there. And then later in life, I had forgotten pieces of it, and I started having flashbacks that were in consecutive chronological order. So the order of events were accurate, and I was having these consecutive flashbacks. So it was like it would fill in a little bit of the memory that I forgot, and then it would fill in a new piece of it, and then a new piece, and maybe a piece I forgot. So that was going on throughout my late teens. In the beginning, the memory was in a white haze, so I thought it was heaven, and that's how they wanted me to think. But the people involved had these, either their face was shaded or they had a black, like a rectangle over their eyes. So it was clearly edited, and I was intrigued because, I was told that this took place in another planet, that this was how I was sent here. This is how my soul was transferred from an ET body to this body. Total lie. So what happened is that as I had those flashbacks, I could see bits and pieces of this room later in life. So as a childhood, I thought it was heaven. Later on, I'm thinking, okay, this is extraterrestrial, because there's technology in this room, but I can't clearly see it. So I go in a hypnosis session with James Rink, and we go and we do these visualization exercises. And essentially what it is he had me visualize a hallway with a bunch of doorways after I came down from the clouds on an elevator and came into this hallway. And each one of these doors represented a memory that I needed to unlock. So I just had to pick one. We did several of these exercises. To make a long story short, I get into the soul transference lab because we can't get anything from the abduction. So here I am, we're exploring the soul transference memory. Inside the memory itself, I'm standing in this lab, and now I can see it crystal clear. It's no longer heavenly looking. It is literally a lab. There's a piece of extraterrestrial technology that looks like an MRI machine, but it's got a bed and an enclosure that's hinged that lowers down on you. It's made out of some kind of polycarbonate or some kind of glass material, whatever it was. I'm sure it was high tech, because it had no fingerprints. It was completely scratch free. It looked brand new and pristine. There wasn't even from what I could see in the hypnosis, if it was accurate, I wasn't even seeing dust particles on it that were clinging to it. So, and then the rest of the room looked dated, looked like 1970s. Earlier, we were talking about the Formica they used to put on things that looked like fake wood. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you could peel it off because it was like a sticker type of thing that you put over furniture. Well, it was all that old 70s stuff with this incredible piece of technology sitting in the middle of the room. And so he had me get inside it, and I could see that I was wearing those little hospital footy things on, and I was wearing a hospital gown. I looked at my body. I literally saw tactical body armor. So this is where my subconscious was adding to what I was visualizing. It was overriding my visualizations. And apparently that's how the hypnosis process works. You start by visualizing, then your subconscious overrides that, and you start experiencing things so something's taking you over, and it's yourself. So he had me step out of that lab and go into the hallway. And that's when I realized that I was in the military base that I had been dreaming about for 20 years or so. My early adulthood and young, childhood. So I knew right then and there, because the emotions hit me, that I was actually a MILAB, that this was a military base, that these weren't extraterrestrials that were part of a civilization I belonged to. These were ET, and they were Haujean as well, because they were using those body containers to carry out this work. So it didn't matter what they looked like. It was the same group that was unified to carry out this whole operation. And my soul was literally transferred from a hybrid super soldier body, not transferred, but fragmented. So that part of me, or that version of me, had his consciousness fragmented. That fragment was implanted into a surrogate, which was my mother, Yvonne. And that was done in 1973. I was born in February 28th, 1974. What I understood is that right about that time, after I was born, successfully born, that the initial version of me, the first one that was born in 47, was killed off by the program. They could remotely kill you, which is what they were doing to me. So that's kind of where I was. And that's, I guess, where we should leave off at, because that was the epiphany moment that literally just turned my life upside down for the second time, because then I realized that, everything I'd been told by these ETs was a lie. Most of it, at least, not everything, but the majority of it, the whole premise, the main idea, the whole storyline, except for the fine details, was completely false. And then I was a victim of a joint ET government program. And from there, it's just been, it's been a hell of a ride from there. But what I didn't go into was the psychic warfare, the interaction with Dracos and super soldiers, which we can get to in the the next interview. That's the really intense stuff, because that one really shows you exactly really what this is and how bad it actually is. And yeah, so what I want people to know is that yes, there are psychic super soldiers. Yes, they do work with negative extraterrestrials and military bases. And yes, they do engage in psychic attacks and manipulation, just like the ETs do with the MILAB victims and other people. They're the ones behind the New Age movement, and big tech is part of this. And I just want to leave you with one final thought. If you, the reason you haven't seen me, and I probably would have made better, I had much better success if I wasn't held back and I wasn't shadow banned, but there's a reason for that, is that big tech colludes with intelligence agencies. And we just found that out with Twitter colluding with, the federal government to suppress the Hunter Biden laptop stuff and other things, that they work in lockstep with each other. So what happens is when you try to go public with this type of information, unless it's new age stuff or whatever, it's something that they're controlling, they put the brakes on and they shadow ban you. And when you see somebody propelled into the spotlight who came literally out of nowhere, and if you look around, I'm sure you could find a couple of these people, and everybody wants to talk to them, and there's no problems. And you see them everywhere, even channels that aren't related to ETs. You may see them on a music channel or a knitting channel, and the person who has the channel is enthusiastic about them, and they do an interview. Well, and they have a best-selling book. What you've got is you've got a controlled MILAB who's there to provide a controlled disclosure to the public, and that's why big tech greenlights everything. I have had the absolute opposite experience. It's been a brick wall, or more or less a jail cell, just one after another. All of these obstacles that keep me from getting my story out to the public, even going as far as trying to make me sick, to kill me. And it was because they didn't want me talking. There's plenty of people saying this, but we'll have to get to the reason after that in the next segment, because once we get into the psychic warfare aspect of this, it'll start making more sense, and it'll also sound like some other people that I've recently saw interviews with. So, I mean, I'm not the only one saying this stuff. So if there's if there's an asylum to put us all in, I'll have lots of company. So, it's, you have to put that out
there. Wow, Nate, then my mind is just blown. So much great information. It was awesome having you here on Lost Through the Rabbit Hole. I can't wait to already have you back. I'm thinking about when we should schedule next.
Anytime you want. Excuse me. Yeah, it was great to have. It was really, really great to do this. I haven't did an interview since October 1st. I wanted to get back into it. And thanks for having me. And thanks for not being like the other people that listen to me and say, oh, no, we're going to delete that. I'm not going to put him on that show. Yeah, thanks for giving me a chance, because we
no problem.
We need a real grassroots disclosure movement, and we really don't have it. we've got people trying, but we really need to try harder. There are some good people out there, but there's a lot of controlled shills, and they, for the most part, they capture the spotlight and prevent the truth from getting out. It's like I said to somebody recently, if you've heard of the person, they're probably not telling you the truth. If you haven't heard of somebody and you just found them and they're obscure, they're likely more accurate because they don't want the truth getting out for various reasons.
Absolutely.
So,
catch you later,
okay,
everybody.
See you later.